This is Mrs. Palmer-Quay with the first video for Module 15. This module is on equilibrium, and in this video I want to talk about reversible reactions and just what chemical equilibrium means. To lay the groundwork for equilibrium, we need to talk about reversible reactions. Now, many reactions are irreversible. You can't go backwards. We can't burn up a piece of paper and then recreate that paper. When you fry an egg, you're changing the proteins in the egg white from the clear water-soluble to the solid white water-insoluble proteins, and we can't unfry an egg. But many other reactions are reversible, and these are very important reactions in many of our biological systems. For example, this illustration here, which might look very complicated, is actually showing us how the carrying of carbon dioxide in our blood is based on a reversible reaction. Carbon dioxide plus water makes carbonic acid, which then breaks down into bicarbonate ion and a hydrogen ion. And that's how we carry carbon dioxide from body cells, where it's been produced in cellular respiration, back out to the lungs. It's hidden in this bicarbonate ion. But when we get to the lungs, that needs to be reversed. Hydrogen ion plus the bicarbonate ion needs to be turned back into carbonic acid and back into water and carbon dioxide so that the carbon dioxide can be released into the lungs and get back out into the air. If this reversible reaction did not exist, we would not be alive because we would not be able to get rid of the carbon dioxide that is made through cellular respiration. Another example of reversible reactions is what happens with the carbon cycle of living things. Sticking with carbon dioxide again, it's present in the atmosphere. It gets picked up by plants and turned into carbohydrates. So we're turning the CO2 into the CH2O base form of carbohydrate, if you remember that from biology form. And then animals eat those carbohydrates and turn it back into carbon dioxide through respiration. So carbon keeps on transferring its form as it goes through a series of reversible reactions. So a reversible reaction, one that can go both forwards and backwards, will reach a point of equilibrium where the rates of the forward and reverse reactions are the same, they are equal, but the concentration of the reactants and the products does not change. So the concentration, the molality stays the same, but these reactions are still occurring. This is a dynamic state. And so one example of that is like running on a treadmill. A person is not going anywhere when they are running on a treadmill, but their feet are certainly still moving. So when a reaction is at a point of equilibrium, it is still moving down on the molecular level. The forward reaction is still occurring. The reverse reaction is still occurring. But from the outside viewpoint of looking at it, things don't seem to change. This concept becomes very important later on in this module when we talk about how we can stress reactions to give us more products. If these reactions were not still occurring on the molecular level at equilibrium, we wouldn't be able to do that. But that's coming up in a future video. I tried to create a little example of dynamic equilibrium in my kitchen using the attraction between water and a paper towel. So I took my strip of paper towel and placed it in a beaker of water, and of course the water started moving right up the paper towel very quickly at first, and then it sort of slowed down, and after an hour it got to be about this height and it just sat there. Well, the water moved upward because of the attraction between the paper towel molecules and the water molecules themselves. So that was my forward reaction. But the water could not go any further because there was a reverse reaction occurring that was the effect of gravity wanting to pull that water down. So when my water got to this point after about an hour, if I put it on a graph, it would look like this, that we had reached a point of equilibrium, that there was no more change in the amount of movement of the water up the paper towel. The rate seems to have, stabilized, and the rate of the water going up is being perfectly offset by the pull of gravity of water going back down. But to illustrate that things were still going on down in the molecular level, I added some food dye. And I just put some drops in the water. I didn't try to mix it in or anything, so it's mixing itself by diffusion. And you can see after about 10 minutes there's a little bit of blue moving up the paper towel. And I know it's not a real bright color, but if you look carefully, this is after about an hour. You can kind of see it's hazing up a little bit, but you can notice that there's definitely blue down here in the bottom. And so if the water had filled up all the paper towel and then just stopped there, the food coloring would not be moving up the paper towel. But because this was a situation of dynamic equilibrium where my forward reaction and reverse reaction were still going on, water could be grabbing a piece of the food coloring and carrying it up the paper towel while some other water molecule was switching places by moving down because of gravity. So getting back to chemical equilibrium. In chemical reactions, of course, we are going from reactants to products. And we start out with a big collection of reactants and no products. And then the reaction in the forward direction would move us from reactants to products. A reverse reaction would move us from products to reactants. And at equilibrium, we're going to have some kind of ratio between how many reactants are present and how many products are present. It can be put on a graph like this, where we see our reactant line coming down because the concentration of reactants is being used up, and then it will level out and not appear to change, even though, as I said, reactions are still happening on the molecular level. Conversely, products, we're starting off without any products down here when we begin, and the product concentration will increase until it also gets to a point where it will level off and not seem to change. So we can talk about what's happening in terms of an equilibrium constant, which is the ratio of the concentration of the products to the concentration of the reactants. And I've written that down here. Our equilibrium constant is a big K, and it is products over reactants, the concentration or the molarity of the products over the reactants. If we just put some numbers on this graph to make things a little bit clearer, let's just pretend that each one of these, this is roughly equidistance here. So we'll say each one of these is a single unit. So this is 1 and this is 2, and of course we're starting at 0. So if we create our equilibrium constant by taking our concentration of the products, which is this one up here, or 2, and put it over the concentration of our reactants, which is 1, so 2 divided by 1, of course, equals 2. So we would say our equilibrium constant is 2, and I'm not worried about the units at this point. If an equilibrium constant is greater than 1, then the reaction favors the products, and that just makes perfect sense when you look at the math. The products are in the numerator, so this number, if this number is going to be bigger than the number on the denominator, then the answer is always going to be larger than 1. And all this is saying is that you've got more products when you're done at equilibrium than you have reactants. So putting this reaction together, letting this reaction happen, you're going to end up with more products than you are reactants. That's not always the case, though. Sometimes you can make products, but the reaction gives you still an awful lot of reactants at the end when you're done. A little bit of product comes out, but a lot of reactants don't change. And the reaction graph would look like this one here, where yes, the reactants go down, but it never crosses that product line. And yes, your products come up, but again, it always stays below the reactant amount. So just like in the previous equation, to figure out the equilibrium constant, you'd put the product's value, and we're just going to say again that these are all equidistant, so this would be 1 and this would be 2. So you put your product value of 1 over your reactant value of 2, and that gives you an equilibrium of constant of 0.5, which is less than 1. So if the equilibrium constant is less than 1, then the reaction is going to favor the reactants at equilibrium. There'll be more reactants than products once you reach the point of equilibrium. That doesn't mean there aren't any products. That just means the concentration is going to be greater for the reactant side than the product side. Of course, I'm sure you can imagine that if the equilibrium is exactly 1, then that would mean that your concentration of reactants and products is exactly the same at equilibrium. But in reality, equilibrium constants are falling either side of 1. Either products are being favored by the reaction once it's reached a point of equilibrium, or reactants are being favored. That finishes what I wanted to say on this video. The next video will talk about how you calculate the equilibrium constant for real, not just hypothetically.